Today, we're going to be talking about The Unnamable, a schlocky, supernatural slasher movie from 1988, loosely based off the works of Howard Phillips
Lovecraft. Whether you know him as the idiosyncratic bigot who penned overvalued and rambling fiction,
people who don't very much like his work usually, is that he only had one style.
the brilliant hypocrite who brought multiple genres kicking and screaming into the 21st century,
The themes and obsessions of 20th century horror, and as we chug on into the 21st century, it doesn't seem to be going away.
or some combination of the two.
Because all horror, or most horror up to Lovecraft, had all been predicated upon the Gothic tradition.
His uneven legacy has undeniably centered him as a gargantuan figure in the twin spheres of speculative fiction and horror.
It's an oft-discussed topic amongst those who move in such circles. Why do we so rarely get a proper Lovecraft adaptation? Meaning specifically, an adaptation which captures the helpless and hopeless tone related to Lovecraft's worldview and works.
Ultimately, that's not really something I'll seek to resolve today. The answers are too numerous, too well trodden, yet all boil down to a simple source: that Lovecraft was a writer and not a filmmaker. The essence of Lovecraft's fiction is profoundly based in the realm of the literate.
Glossolalia more impenetrable than anything in Finnegan's Wake. He is using techniques of deliberately alienating the reader or confusing the reader. His descriptions tend to be along the lines of, here's 3 things that Cthulhu doesn't look like.
In his stories, the flow of the prose and lack of sure footing in the character's worldview is the first key to reckoning with Lovecraft's aesthetic principles.
Lovecraft's plots often enough included suitably dramatic set pieces that you could conceivably construct a feature film around, but the core emotion found in Lovecraft's work was much more evanescent than in his story's most bombastic moments. Something lurked in the shadows on his pages, something different, darker, thicker, and sometimes deeper than what usually gets labeled as horror. But I will note that it seems Lovecraftian adaptations seem to do best, financially, critically, and in the court of public opinion, the less they draw from his work. Generally speaking, the flicks that take a few thematic cues or who outright borrow a few key elements tend to succeed most effectively. Even now, when information about the qualities of the man's works are at an all-time high, where there are more folks interested in Lovecraftian fiction than ever before, adaptations of his work still struggle to receive a relevant return at the box office. I'd say the 2 most relevant adaptations to borrow from Lovecraft's work pretty easily could come down to Evil Dead and The Reanimator. Evil Dead's Lovecraftian connection basically starts and ends with the existence of the evil book known as the Necromonicon. Reanimator goes even further with the setting and general plot, but does much more in the way of character work than its source material. Both films were incredibly successful with audiences, and both didn't get any closer to the tone of the source material with their sequels, for good reason by my estimate. Unnamable owes much to both of these movies, likely more than any specific story of Lovecraft's work, though it does borrow some key points from the statement of Randolph Carter and The Unnamable.
The story, by the way, is about 2 dudes arguing in the cemetery until it gets dark out and then a monster pops up and attacks them both.
In the movie, there are 3 friends. One friend, Joel, is a steadfast skeptic, and in order to disprove the legend of the Unnamable, heads off alone to spend the night in the creepy house. In a point-of-view kill, we get our earliest flashes of Evil Dead's influence in the cinematography, clearly trying to invoke the same kinetic style.
At this point, the monster's kept deliberately underexposed to enhance the feeling of mystery. This leaves our dual protagonists, Howard, a good-looking twink who writes poetry,
I had some poetry published. You know it's more than that.
and Randolph Carter, the most smarmy bastard who's ever lived. And just as an aside, I can't be the only one who finds this naming convention strange. Randolph Carter was basically an author avatar for Lovecraft, and, well, obviously Howard is his first name. It just seems lackluster, creatively speaking. Anyways, after Joel fails to return to school the next day, Randolph refuses to investigate, as he assumes it's either a prank, which would leave him feeling outsmarted, or he'd be putting himself at risk of a real monster existing and attacking him. Pretty pragmatic. So he sits and studies while Howard does all the legwork, a trend that continues for the rest of the movie. The dynamic between our two protagonists isn't that different than the dynamic of Herbert West and his roommate Dan in the first Reanimator flick, although West's counterpart isn't a murderous sociopath, and Dan's counterpart isn't such a charming jock type, although he is in a love triangle. But like Herbert, Randolph is calculating and a bit cold, and like Dan, Howard is easily led. Elsewhere in the library, Tanya has a crush on Howard.
But thankfully, Wendy explains to her that when it comes to the social ladder, you can either fuck your way up or fuck your way down, and it doesn't pay to work side to side. They meet up with a few jocks and invent a reason to spend the night in a spooky murder house.
Although this movie doesn't have a high body count, the special effects and general production does make the violence particularly visceral. About a third of the way into the flick, things start to get spooky. The house of the Unnamable is lit primarily in blue and gray tones, setting a creepy, ethereal vibe. The encroaching visitors and their flashlights cast amber hues, contrasting nicely, like a movie poster. In fact, from here on out, the use of color in the Unnamable is generally striking, and goes a long way to set it apart from lower grade slasher flicks. The camera work is uneven, with a few visual flourishes that mostly work, but others that don't. It doesn't get too experimental for the most part, often using practical framing techniques to make the most effective use of the moody set and lighting, and when it does that, it works pretty well. About 35 minutes in, we have an example of my least favorite horror trope, the pointless point of view, in which a rushed camera chases our unwitting protagonist. It seems to last far too long, and the times the camera almost catches up are painfully cheesy. Before it's revealed, the point of view was completely harmless. These scenes never work, neither for establishing mood or any sort of tension, and they certainly never result in an actual jump scare, but this one is particularly goofy and pointless, serving as a setup for when Randolph and Howard finally decide to spring into action and investigate the Unnamable for themselves. Generally, the editing in this movie is likely its weakest point, although it's most likely just the result of some combination of lacking time, money, and proper B-roll coverage.
We rejoin the jocks and the would-be sorority girls in a room with significantly less spooky lighting.
She was getting out of the car. The policeman tried to keep her from looking back, but she did. And hanging...
Bruce is in the middle of telling an urban legend, a somewhat poignant juxtaposition, considering our scholar is chiefly fixated on folklore, or legendary urban legends. The spooky story time evolves into a spooky walk through the house, which devolves into an obligatory sex scene and some creepy sex pest behavior.
Stop it, you're drunk.
That leads to sympathetic humanization.
You call that thinking?
Another one of my least favorite tropes. Finally, now that we've had some nudity and some force bonding...
So we broke up. Do you have a boyfriend?
Well...
At about the 50-minute mark, the monster shows up proper. Katrin Alexandra is the lady under the makeup, and her performance is one of the most well-regarded aspects of the Unnamable. I think I can see what they were going for. The elegant motions highlight the Unnamable's human characteristics, and should give us sympathy for the tragic horror, but personally, I just don't think the movie does enough with the theme for this sort of artistic device to seem earned. I feel bad dumping on her too much, as she hasn't got a large filmography, and she's clearly proficient at what she does, but simply doesn't work for me in the context of the movie. A lot of people on the internet seem to disagree with me though. The costume's more questionable aspects can be traced back directly to the core story, as the Unnamable being, for some reason, leaves hoof prints and gore marks as if from a set of bullhorns. An odd detail in Lovecraft's story, especially considering the general description of the Unnamable. Less than 30 seconds after the monster's reveal, our heroes show up to investigate, and they start playing Scooby-Doo with the Unnamable in an attempt to survive the night. Moments after his arrival, if it hasn't been clear from the start, Randolph Carter is a bit of an asshole. He's certainly on the side of good overall, but he's condescending and cold-hearted by default. He reacts like this to news of his friend's death.
Joel's dead.
That's to be expected.
Don't you understand? Joel is dead and there may be others.
I know.
Howard asks for a hand moving an unconscious woman to someplace safe,
Carter, you want to give me a hand here?
and Carter literally helps move her with just one hand. And while Tanya fails to describe the Unnamable, he quips,
Unnamable, perhaps? Cut it out.
"It's been 15 years since I first saw this movie on a rented VHS. I thought about this reading once a week since. The Unnamable might have a lot of faults, but Randolph was perfectly cast for the role. It's too bad he spends most of the movie sitting back in the safe room, while our more conventionally handsome lead does all the heavy lifting and damsel chasing. But according to Wikipedia, he almost didn't get cast at all, seeing as he wasn't seen as conventionally handsome enough by the producers. Bruce gets his brains bashed in a particularly brutal scene. It goes from eyebrow raising to cringe inducing quite quickly. There's more wandering, and meanwhile, Lonesome Randolph finds a Necronomicon.
A Necronomicon.
Meanwhile, we're treated to another legendary character-building scene.
But what are guys seeing, Wendy?
I think most guys just see her as a good time.
It's her big tits, isn't it?
I guess.
Damn.
Things pick up speed short moments later when Howard and Tanya find Joel's body. And seconds later,
You mean?
when he gets separated from Tanya. Randolph learns the origins of the Unnamable and of the magic binding placed around the property, including the surrounding trees. Herbert goes looking for Tanya and finds Wendy.
Kill him! You killed him! You're sick!
No, Wendy, I don't know what's going on here.
Who blames him for the murders, assuming he's out for revenge against his social betters. She attacks before the Unnamable comes to the rescue. I was kind of hoping there might be a monster fucking subplot, but no such luck. Back in the safe room, Randolph connects the dots, and it seems like he gets up to join the rest of the movie in progress, but ends up heading outside and descending into a tomb to solve the problem with ancient magic that he learned about 2 minutes beforehand. Howard wanders around before he finally finds Tanya. The Unnamable chases them into the attic, and they barricade themselves in. It seems like they're gonna be fine, until we get a great use of Chekhov's reflection.
It's out there!
No, it's just an image in the glass.
What he saw reflected in the glass of the attic window, an image retained within it.
Setting up the climactic finale. There's a prolonged struggle until Randolph channels the ending of Evil Dead 2 to save the day.
There's a doomer ending teased, but then Randolph just kind of climbs out of the ground and easily shrugs off some very fake-looking skeletal hands. Overall, The Unnamable is far from a great movie, but it's entertaining and boasts some charming performances and memorable moments. Solid B horror viewing. I doubt it would be much better if it was more in line with Lovecraft's prose. For certain, it would be quite a bit shorter, which some might see as an improvement. But The Unnamable has always been a cult film in my own mind, and I am happy to see it get a re-release now that we can kind of appreciate some of its more artistic qualities.
It's currently streaming on Arrow, and though it may be unnameable, it certainly isn't unwatchable.
I like that one.